recording? I am recording now. All right. So we are on chapter 5. Okay, I think I might want to do, I think I'm going to do another 10 pages, another 5 chapters.
Another 2 pages.
Another 2 pages.
Another 1 page.
I'll glance at the page and record that, taking a breath, and then end the recording.
Nice. Oh, wait, talk. Oh my god, I forgot. You need to be, that was my boyfriend.
I'm not here.
He said he's not here, folks. Okay. Yeah. We forgot we were talking earlier, but yeah, he forgot to mute himself. But it's okay. All is good. That's the usual rule. And if it's broken, bam! Just kidding. No. If it happens, it happens. But usually it doesn't happen because I'll catch it. So. Alright. So, last off, we left off with, Ella, or I guess you can call her Ella because it's just Ella. That she just had a scary encounter with Lord Reston. He almost died, and everyone was just like, "Why did you save him? You're supposed to be girly, and you're not supposed to, blah 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 blah." Rich people things say, yeah. All right. So now, without further ado, I will start reading. Alright. So, chapter 5. The next morning, when the time came that I normally met with Lord Reston, I sat wondering if someone else would replace him, or if, miracle of miracles, I'd actually have some time to myself. I was irritated that, once again, nobody had told me anything. The servants all knew my schedule. How else did the maids know exactly when to flounce in to make my bed, exactly when to make themselves scarce? But I, the supposed princess, never knew from one minute to the next what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to be until someone hissed last-minute instructions to me. Probably the little servant girl, Mary, could have told me yesterday who was going to take over teaching whatever it was Lord Reston was supposed to be teaching me. If I had just decided that if I did have a free moment, I'd like to hunt Mary up to check up on Lord Reston when a strange knock sounded at my door. I say strange because until that moment, I never thought of the fact that every single person in the castle knocked in one of 2 ways. All the servants knocked once loudly, as if to guarantee they got my attention, and then once softly, as if to apologize that their humble selves were so disrespectful as to disturb royalty. Everyone else, all my instructors and ladies in waiting and all other nobility, knocked 4 times, emphatically. The knock's as good as saying, "I am important and acknowledge me at once." But this knock was like a half line of music. Da da Duh, duh, duh. Without thinking, I went to the door and gave the two answering knocks. I went to the door and gave the two answering knocks it seemed to demand. Duh, duh. And then I pushed open the door. Then I pushed open the door. The young man a young man I've never seen before stood in the corridor. He was perhaps a half decade older than me, tall and much too thin for his frame and his clothes. The clothes also seemed too formal for his comfort somehow, although by castle standards they were practically slovenly. Dark velvet breeches with worn knees, and a wrinkled white shirt, a brown coat, and waistcoat of obviously good wool, but poorly sewn. His dark curly hair could most charitably be called mussed. It reminded me it reminded me of the way our village had looked after a windstorm toppled three houses and knocked down six trees. The man's muddy the man's muddy brown eyes were as wide open and stunned looking as if he'd just personally witnessed such a storm. Yes? I said. Princess! I had no idea. I mean, I don't mean to be forward, but you're even more beautiful up close, he stammered. I sighed. I hated this reaction. About the time I passed my 13th summer 2 years ago, men had begun looking at me strangely. The butcher's boy, whom I had previously considered a sensible fellow, followed me around for 5 days with an expression that Adel Adel. Hold on, I need to search for this word because I don't know it. Okay, hold on. Addlepated. I guess that's what it. Oh, okay. I guess it is addlepated. All right. Followed me around for 5 days with an expression as addlepated as a cow off her feed. He got in the way when I tried to scrub some. He got in the way when I tried to scrub every flagstone of our front path by hand, in the way Lucille demanded. I finally had to tell him I'd pull every one of his fingernails out with my bare hands if he didn't leave me alone. I wouldn't and couldn't have done it, of course, but he was too stupid and lovesick to know that. That got rid of him, but I still hated to go to the butcher's because of him. Or I did before I became a princess and didn't have to sort through animal entrails anymore. Of course, I'd be bothered pondering it. No, no. Uh, oh, no, me neither. It's addle pated. Yeah, addlepated. There we go. Right, I have never heard that word either. It is very strange. All right. Um. Okay. Of course, if I'd bothered pondering it, I would have thought becoming a princess and wearing fancy dresses instead of rags and having several maids whose sole purpose in life seemed to be making me beautiful would have subjected me to more adulterated expressions than ever. But it hadn't. Maybe being the prince's betrothed was as good as wearing a sign that said, "Addle or pate over this girl, and the prince could have you beheaded." Before this young man, or boy, really, he wasn't much more than a boy. Every glance directed in my way had been perfectly discreet and bland, but he was still gawking. "Well," I said, "thank you, but please, I beg you, don't let it bother you." He shut his gaping mouth and gave a little jerk and returned to what I guess must be normal for him. He dipped into an awkward bow and was laughably off balance, then swung back up sideways and introduced himself. I'm Jed Rest I'm Jed Reston. I'm sure someone told you. I'm going to be teaching you because my father is dang it. I'm not used to talking to princesses. What words am I allowed to use to tell you what happened to my father? I stepped aside to let him I stepped to I said ugh. I stepped aside to let him into the room. "I'm not really a princess," I said, forgetting myself. Then I quickly added, "I mean, I wasn't raised the way a princess would be raised in this kingdom, and I saw what happened to your father. How is he now?" "Just fine. Thank you for your concern." The words came out rapid fire, like blasts from several cannons at once. "No, really," I said. "Tell me. I don't care what words you use." Jed grimaced, still mostly paralyzed. But you can tell that underneath, he's furious at not being able to get up and walk and talk and act pompous. Oops, dang it again. Dad's right. I never will learn to be diplomatic. He looked so nonplussed. He looked so nonplussed. I couldn't help laughing. After a second, he joined in. "I suppose I shouldn't do that when Dad's not around to defend himself, but he already knows I think he acts pompously. He says it's part of his job, which I'm supposed to be doing now." I'd met Jed only moments earlier, but already I knew he could never carry off pomposity. Pomposity. I'm just gonna say that. He did seem serious, though, about doing his father's job. His eyes were scanning the room. "Where do you study?" he asked. I pointed to the pair of chairs where Lord Reston and I had sat only the day before. I was delighted that Jed sat down immediately without doing the elaborate cat and mouse dance all my other instructors followed. "Princess, may I help you to your seat?" Deep bow. "May it be your pleasure that your humble servant be seated as well?" Deep bow again. Madame Basset had told me that if anyone failed to show me the proper respect of that ridiculous little routine, ridiculous being my term for it, not hers, I should feign a fainting spell and call for the guard to have the cretin removed. I have never bothered to ask how I could call for a guard while fainting. I hastened to my chair for fear that Jed might realize his error and attempt to correct it. In the past weeks, I had been princessed and humble servanted enough to last a lifetime. Jed was big as Jed was busy taking a slender booklet out of his jacket. "Can you read?" he asked. "Of course," I said, blushing indignantly, though there was no "of course" about it. Even in the palace, maybe especially in the palace, plenty of women couldn't read, and since I was a commoner, if Jed knew what I really was, he couldn't assume I'd even seen an alphabet, let alone ever opened a book. "My father taught me," he said. "He collected old books, and sometimes I would help him appraise them. I was overcome with a flash of memory. My father and I, our heads bent close over an old book, dusty and brittle with age, yet richly gilded, full of beautiful script and words that sang. The candlelight around us ebbed and flowed, and I felt like we were sitting in an ever-changing dome of light, while all around us was darkness. It was not one particular moment that I realized, but dozens, for we had often looked at books together in the evenings before the Steppe Eagles arrived. Okay. Does he only buy books and or also sell? Does he only buy books or also sell? Jed asked. There were a rare There are a few rare volumes of philosophy I've been looking for. I really thought that was the fucking Jed that said my father taught me. Um, there are there are a few volumes of philosophy I've been looking for. In truth, my father had to sell almost as much as he bought. That was how he supported us. But of course, I couldn't say that if I was supposed. But of course, I couldn't say that if I was supposed to be a princess. My father is dead, I blurted instead. The words brought back the pain I'd felt when I heard the news 3 years ago. I could still see Lucille clutching the letter and practically cackling. The fool was trying to cross the swollen border. For books! And she rolled her eyes. Now I closed mine momentarily. I'm sorry, Judd said with an air of deep sincerity. Thank you, I said. I had not known what to do with condolences when the news was fresh, and I did not know now. Oh wait. Thank you, I said. I had not known what to do with condolences when the news was fresh, and I did not know now. I bent forward to look at the books in Jed's hand. It was the first one I had seen coming since the castle. Yeah, I bent forward to look at the book in Jed's hand. It was the first one I had seen since coming to the castle, so I felt genuine eagerness. What would you have me read? He showed me the title, The Book of Faith. My father has not showed you this? He asked in puzzlement. I shook my head. But he was instructing you in the official religion. He was to certify that you were a fit companion for the prince and would raise your offspring in the faith. I started laughing as I hadn't since coming to the castle. I probably hadn't even laughed like that since before the Steppe Eagles entered my life. Religion? I asked incredulously. I thought he was teaching me royal genealogy. All those dull dead kings. I was laughing so hard, even Jed had to smile. Aye, to my father 'tis much the same thing, he admitted. My laughter turned into snorts. Very unroyal, I calmed myself. About the faith, Jed began. I began giggling again and calmed myself, only to start again and again. I was a fountain of hilarity, shooting out bursts of laughter every time Jed tried to speak. At last, he gave up and laughed too. And that's the end of chapter 5. Oh. Okay. On to chapter 6. Yes, chapter 6. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Alright, chapter 6. After that, my days fell into a happier pattern. I still struggled to stay awake during needlepoint lessons, and Madame Bissette still corrected my pronunciation and my posture and my manners about 50,000 times for every 5 minutes I spent with her. I still longed to go outside. Madame Bissette turned down my timid request for riding lessons with a horrified sniff and the words, "A princess would never be out. A princess would never be without her carriage." And then she fainted. And I still wish that Prince Charming and I could talk, even just once, without a chaperone there making us all stiff and formal and tongue-tied. But at least now, with Jed, I knew I had one person I could talk to in the castle. As the days passed, I decided that the servant girl, Mary, was another. She began springing up at odd moments with odd bits of information about Lord Riston. "Criminy, would you believe he heaved his pillow at the wall yesterday? And him a lord and all? And him a lord and all?" Or touchingly eager offers of help. "You don't need anything, do you? Because if you do, I could get it for you. I've dusted the whole castle since breakfast. Seems like, and now me Mum says I'm allowed to do whatever I want." I found myself telling her things I probably shouldn't have, because she was so much like a puppy dog bouncing out around me, ready to fetch anything. I wished without so much as ready to fetch anything I wished without so much as a pat on the head for a reward. "Vinegar will get that out," I told her one day when she informed me she couldn't be around for a day or so because she had been given dozens of stained napkins to wash. "Yes, that's what me mum says." That's what me mum said," Mary answered. She squinted, an expression that made her features look even more unmatched than ever. "But how do you know? Is it true? What people say about you?" "What people? What do they say?" I braced myself for Mary to accuse me of having watched plenty of dirty laundry in my lifetime, or of possessing no more royal blood than herself, an accusation that was certainly true. I was more than prepared to confess, but Mary's backing away from me in awe. "Oh, nothing is..." She started timidly, then grinned with a bit more of her usual flippancy. "Is magic easier than vinegar?" It was my turn to squint, puzzled. But Mary was just melted away, because yet another instructor was being shown into the room to teach me something I didn't want to know. Hold on, I need to say that again. Well, it was my turn to squint, puzzled. But Mary just melted away, because yet another instructor was being shown into the room to teach me something I didn't want to know. Do you believe in magic? I asked Jed later that morning when he showed up for my religion class. It depends, he said slowly. Slowly, as I say it fast. It depends, he said slowly. I was discovering that Jed never gave easy, automatic, or quick answers, but had to ponder out every side of things. I believe there can be extraordinary events that ordinary humans tend to label as magic because we can't fully understand. And are you an ordinary human? I teased. He hesitated and seemed about to ask me something, then appeared to think better of it. I'm certainly no prince, he said. Now, about that catechism I gave you. I recited it word for word, the list of 20 beliefs I was supposed to swear to that the list of 20 beliefs that I was supposed to swear to that would make me a fit wife for the prince and a fit mother for a future king. This catechism was much longer, more formal, and less understandable than the one children learned back in the village. Of course, that one ran, I believe in God. He is good. I will obey him. So there was lots of room for improvisation. But I had a hard time believing that my ladies-in-waiting, the Moronics Cipriana, the breathtakingly beautiful but addled Cyrana, had spent much of their lives pondering the transubstantiation of the spirit, or the resurrection of the physical being of our entities. For that matter, the king, queen, and Prince Charming didn't seem like the types to sit around considering weighty religious matters, and they supposedly were in charge of the entire church. Good. Jed nodded encouragingly. That's really all you need. I stared. So that's it? I've graduated? He looked away. No, of course not. Now that you know the creed, we have to make sure you understand it. I breathed a sigh of relief. That could last at least until my wedding, if not until my dying day. Jed opened the Book of Faith between us and pointed at the first line of the catechism I had recited. He opened his mouth to begin an explanation. I wasn't raised to be religious, I said suddenly. No? Jed asked, typically patient with the interruption. No, my father was a doubter. He carried that around like a belief. So you're just reciting this. It means nothing to you. No, I don't know. I knew people back in the village, where I come from, who had a great deal of faith, and it truly meant something. It made a difference. I told Jed about my neighbor, Mrs. Branson, of 10 children. Once, years ago, her husband broke his leg and couldn't work for many weeks, and they ran out of food. This was during a hard winter, and even if the Bransons hadn't been too proud to beg, there were few people who could spare enough for 12 extra people. So she prayed, and then that very night, food appeared on her doorstep. Several loaves of bread, a wheel of cheese, a cured ham, enough to tide them over. Did she ever find out who left it? Jed asked. No, but I knew. Those exact those exact foods disappeared from our larder, and my father's shoes were muddy in the morning, even though I'd cleaned them. I mean, they'd been cleaned the night before. Jed, di- Jed digested the story, which I'd never told anyone before. Lucille would have killed my father had she'd known. I, I think you lost me, Jed said. How does that story argue with poor belief? Maybe your neighbor should have just prayed to your father. Wouldn't have worked, he said. I said. He hated beggars, but her faith gave Mrs. Branson. Hold on. Yeah. But her faith gave Mrs. Branson a sense of peace and dignity that even my father, a doubter, had to respect. Jed nodded thoughtfully. I wasn't raised to be religious either, he murmured after a moment. I turned to him in astonishment. What? But your father is priest to the king. I'd only recently learned that from Mary, so that was why he was supposed to be addressed as His Excellency. I continued in my amazement. After the king, he's the most powerful person in the church. Jed shrugged. State religion. You'll learn this. It's got nothing to do with God. It's all show. Smoke and mirrors. If any of these people really believed what they mumbled about, they'd go do something instead of just talking. So, what does that mean about you? I teased. Why aren't you doing something instead of just talking? I thought we'd been friends long enough that I could joke like that. But Jed flushed a deep red and turned shy, as if I'd accused him of being sweet on some maiden. Well, actually, he said, stumbling over his words. There is something I'm trying to find a way to. There is something I'm trying to find a way to do. What? I asked, full of curiosity. I had no idea what he might say. Jed looked down. You know about the Swollen War? He asked softly. If he hadn't been acting so strangely, I might have joked. Do you take me for an imbecile? Even the village idiot knew to curse Swallow. Because they were trying to take lands that belonged to our kingdom. At least, that's what everybody said. I sometimes wondered what Swallow's version was. My father had once said, in the privacy of our own home, that the two kingdoms had been fighting for so long that they'd rendered the land useless to anyone. You want to fight in the war? I asked incredulously. There were some who did. I remember boys in my village who spoke of nothing but the glory they would earn in battle. But Jed didn't seem the type. No, he said, as if surprised I might suggest such a thing. I wouldn't give a minute of my life for that. It's the refugees, the people who have been thrown off their lands by the war. Every time the battle lines shift, the people on the borders lose crops, houses, barns, sometimes everything. And some of them have nowhere to go. So I want to set up camps to take care of them and to make sure no one starves or freezes or dies because of what our kingdom is doing. His eyes flashed, and I thought, this is the key to Jed. This is the most important thing in the world to him. The whole time I'd known him, which was about 3 weeks now, he'd seemed mopey and directionless, like an old sheepdog who'd been taken away from his herd. As nice as he'd been to me, I knew he didn't want to spend his life teaching pompous words to pretend princesses. So this is what he really wanted to do instead. Have you told anyone? I asked. Have you asked your father or the king or whoever? Of course! Jed said so forcefully I jerked back against my brocaded chair. And? He shook his head mournfully. They put me off, he said. They say they'll study the possibility. They'll draw up a committee to see what ought to be done. They'll think over it. They'll think it over. Not that they'd ever let me go, anyhow, because I'm supposed to be studying to take over my father's job. But meanwhile, people are dying. I tilted my head to the side, considering. Why do you need anyone's permission? Why do you need anyone's permission? Why don't you just do it yourself? Jed gave me a condescending look. The first time he'd made me feel like the empty-headed piece of fluff everyone else seemed to expect me to be. I have no great wealth of my own, he said bitterly. I don't want to feed these people just for a day. I want to give them their lives back. But maybe you... Something crept into his voice, a slyness I did not associate with Jed. What? I asked, my heart beating unusually fast. When you're queen, or maybe sooner than that, once you have the prince's confidence, maybe you can plead my cause for me. You can convince the prince to bankroll my refugee camps. It wouldn't take much, not compared with the vastness of the royal treasury, not compared with what they're already spending on the war. Jed leaned forward, beseechingly. Will you help? I felt a strange disappointment. What had I expected him to say, given who I was, where I was, what I was, a female, now a female of the nobility? How else could I be expected to help? And I was no stranger to the power of pillow talk. Early on in my father's marriage to Lucille, while I still thought of the tangled relations in our household as a war that I could win, I had many times thought I'd convinced my father of something. That Cormund and Griselda should be required to wash dishes with me, say, only to hear the decision reversed the next morning. I would watch my father and Lucille retire to his room together and imagine Lucille purring her arguments. Oh yes, I'm all for fairness, but Cormund and Griselda have such delicate skin, an affliction Ella is fortunate not to suffer. Without me there to counter her. So now I was supposed to possess that. Not real power, not the right way, not the right to make. Not the real power, not the right to make any decision myself, but the power of persuasion, when coupled with a kiss and a breathy whisper, and the rest of what men and women do in bed. Unaccountably, the thought disgusted me. It was a long moment before I realized Jed was still waiting for my answer. He was leaning so far forward in his chair that a small breath might knock him off and send him tumbling gracelessly to the floor. His expression was so full of hope. I wanted to cry.
I'll I cleared my throat. I'll do what I can. And that is the end of chapter 6. I'll be right back for just a second. I need to do something. It's so warm on my bed. I am back. Back and better than ever. Okay. Okay. Sorry for the people that are listening on YouTube, and the volume gets really loud at some points. Okay. Alright, so, chapter 7. Oh yeah, did I mention that was the end of chapter 6? Because that was the end of chapter 6. And now we're going to start chapter 7 now. Alright, so chapter 7. That afternoon, while sitting in my ladies in waiting, that afternoon, while sitting with my ladies in waiting, working on a particularly vexatious tapestry pattern, I couldn't get my conversation with Jed out of my mind. I jabbed my needle in and out, the loops of white thread accumulating as slowly as milk in a pail from an old cow. We were working on a scene of knights at a tournament, and my Miager or Meager? I think it's Miager. Yeah. My Miager needlework skills had been exiled to the clouds and the sky. Oh, you think it's meager? Yeah, I think it might be meager too. But I've heard Miager before. Or maybe I'm just making that up in my head. Okay. Okay, we were uh, we were working on a scene of knights at a tournament, and my meager needlework skills had been exiled to the clouds in the sky. Cipriana, for all her mental deficiencies, was surprisingly brilliant at knowing where to stitch to make an expression look jubilant or defeated. So she was doing faces. I stopped for a second and watched her needle flying in and out, creating a sense of fervor with every visage. Jed had looked just as fervent, declaring his hopes for the refugee camps. I remember. Uh, um, Jed had looked just as fervent, declaring his hopes. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Gotta put on lip balm. Yeah, Jed had looked just as fervent, declaring his hopes for the refugee camps. I remembered thinking years ago about the time my father married Lucille, that everyone must have had something that matters to them more than anything else, that blinds them to everything else. How else to explain my father and how else to explain my father to Lucille? he had learned and he was learned and honorable and true. She was base and lazy and greedy and mendacious. She was probably intelligent enough, but she did not care about knowledge, only gossip and fashion and getting her own way. For a while, I feared that what people whispered was true, that my father was lovesick, blinded to her faults by his desire to touch her skin, caress her body, join his to hers. She was not bad looking, if you didn't know her. She. I don't think most 12-year-olds want to think about their parents having intimate relations. How much worse. Sorry, getting distracted. I don't think most 12-year-olds want to think about their parents having intimate relations. How much worse that my father's relations were with Lucille. But then, by listening at doors and watching them together, I hit upon what I was sure was the truth. Somehow she'd figured out that his books mattered most to him, and she'd been crafty enough to pretend to love them too. I believe she'd even promised to catalog them for him, a task he'd been vowing to undertake for as long as I could remember, but despaired for ever accomplishing. Of course, after they were married, her true views came out. I never saw anyone look as hurt as he did the day she the day she shoved away a particularly rare book he was showing her and snarled, "Get that vile, disgusting thing away from me." I was ashamed to say I tried to deepen the hurt, reporting to him every insane, vicious, and ignorant comment she had ever made about him or his books. Childishly, I thought he could just undo his mistake, unmarry her. I didn't understand honor and promises, or didn't want to. He began traveling a lot more to search for ever rarer books, but also to avoid Lucille, and that was what he was doing when he died. So that my So that was my father's passion where it led him. And now I was Jed's, wanting to help those who hurt, wanting to help those hurt by the war was a noble cause, to be sure. Why did that bother me? Was it because I didn't have a cause of my own? Was I supposed to? I brought my needle in and out dozens of times, pondering that question. I am enraged. I am engaged, I reminded myself. Prince Charming is supposed to be your passion. No, he is your passion. You love him. Somehow, though, it seemed like I needed more, because in because it was maybe it was because I'd won him too easily. I'd known girls in my village who'd set their hearts on a particular boy, then plotted their days. Yeah, I'd known girls in my village who'd set their hearts on a particular boy, then plotted their days so they'd be coming out of the baker's just in time to bump into their beloved as he was leaving the miller's. They'd save and skimp for weeks to have enough sugar to bake a pie for their intended, only to say, giggling, "Oh, it was some extra we had. Thought you might want it." Then, when the pie was delivered, as if any sign of wanting him would scare him off, which it did sometimes. Which it sometimes did. I had hardly plotted to ensnare the prince. I'd never ever, I'd never ever, I'd never even dreamed it was possible. I'd just gone to the ball as a lark, partly out of curiosity, partly to spite Lucille. Would I have cared about going if she hadn't forbidden me? I felt a strange surge of triumph. Yeah, I felt a surge of triumph. Oh, how I had spited her. Then I was instantly ashamed. Perhaps truly what mattered most to me was beating Lucille. It didn't seem like a very worthy cause. As much as she had messed up the last 5 years of my life, Lucille had problems of her own. Now that I was in the castle and she was still in the village, I shouldn't think of her as an enemy anymore. I should probably just pity her and find some other goal to focus on. But what? My thread tangled then, and I had to interrupt a discussion about dressing gowns to get Sempriana to help me install it. She was she was also quite skilled at that. I suppose I was too hard on her, considering her an absolute simpleton. I apologized profusely to Sempriana, as if that could make up for all the cruel things I'd ever thought about Lucille. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how it happened." Silently, Sempriana picked at the knots in my thread with a perfectly curved fingernail. Then she began to pull out my last row of stitches. "Wait," I said. "Why?" Then I saw and then I saw a snarl that I hadn't even noticed at the beginning of the row. All my stitches since all my all my stitches since had been useless. "Oh," I said. "I see. I'm sorry about that too. I guess my mind was wandering." Sempriana barely glanced up. "Aye, princess," she said. Can you not can you not ask your fairy godmother for help?" "My what? My what?" I asked. She and a few other she and a few of the others giggled. I heard someone whisper on the other side of the tapestry, "Well, of course she has to pretend she doesn't know." Nothing, princess, Sempriana had murmured, keeping her eyes on her work. I looked around. All 12 of the other ladies had their heads bent low over the tapestry. Nobody was going to enlighten me. But fairy godmother? It reminded me of Mary asking about magic. I decided the castle folks, servants, and nobility alike were a superstitious lot. I wish I had had a fairy godmother to protect me all those years I had lived with the Steppe Evils. Of course, I wouldn't need one now. Would I? And that's the end of chapter 7? Yeah, chapter 7. Alright. Chapter 8. Alright, yeah, chapter 8. Once he'd shared his dream for the refugee camps, Jed had seemed to feel he could tell me anything. My daily religion lessons were taken up less and less with talk of the Trinity or the corporeal evidence of His Holiness, whatever that meant, and more with banter, jokes, and Jed's tales about his childhood. I feel sorry for any child who didn't grow up in this castle, he said one sunny morning a few weeks after he'd taken over for his father. Why? I asked in surprise. By then, Jed surely realized my own childhood had taken place outside of any palace walls. And if he didn't, I hardly cared if he found out. I would think, and if he didn't, I hardly cared if he found out. I would think a child in this castle was to be pitied. All those people around telling you to sit up straight. Don't speak while the Minister of the Treasury is speaking, and don't spill your soup on the foreign ambassador, or it'll start a war. Jed laughed. Yes, there was rather too much of that for my taste, but we children were mostly kept out of sight, so we didn't have to worry about foreign policy. What I meant was, have you ever noticed the length of the banisters in the main staircase? I nodded, remembering my awe the night of the ball at the side of the grand staircase, which rose from the entrance hall to a spot that would be 3 stories higher in a normal house. The tallest man I'd ever seen, a carpenter in my village called Tom the Giant, could have lain down on a step with neither his head nor his feet touching the sides. And the staircase Hold on, let me say that again. I nodded, remembering my awe the night of the ball at the side of the grand staircase, which rose from the entrance hall to a spot that would have been 3 stories higher in a normal house. The tallest man I'd ever seen, a carpenter in my village, called Tom the Giant, could have lain down on a step with neither his head nor his feet touching the sides, and the staircase was lined on each side by pillars and a banister of rare polished wood that I knew from Lord Reston's lectures had been brought from faraway lands decades ago. You used to slide down the banisters? I gasped. I did not confess that I had longed to do that very thing from the moment I'd seen them. But I never see but I've never been near the banisters when there weren't at least a dozen others with me. And while it would be delightful to see the scandalized expression of Madame's of Mad- uh, and while it would be delightful to see the scandalized expression on Madame Bissette's face, I did not want to marry the prince. I did still want to marry the prince. Not to mention to continue living. Uh, not to mention to continue living. Hold on. I need to do something. Okay, here we go. Sorry for the noise. Okay. Just had to do something. Okay. Excuse me. Considering that I'd been confirmed. I cannot talk. I'm almost to 10 though. Surprisingly enough. Okay. Yeah, considering that I'd been confined to my room for letting my petticoat slip out and show beneath my skirt for an instant, I had a feeling Madame Bassett would view banister sliding by a princess as a crime worthy of execution. Was it as much fun as it looks? I asked Jed. He grinned in a way that made me think he must have been an awfully orny little boy. And no, I did not say horny, I said orny. Orny. For the viewers out there that think have dirty thoughts. Orny. No. No. Hold on. No. No.
Sorry, I got distracted. I thought I heard some coyotes outside, like faintly, like howling and stuff, which I think I did. Anyways, all right. He grinned in a way that made me think he must have been an awfully orny little boy. Oh, yes. My brothers and I would sneak out at night and have races, one of us at each side. Brothers? I asked. I have three, all younger and all away at school in the East, he said. So, will they all become priests like you? I teased. He grimaced. No. 'Tis only the oldest who must follow his father's career. They may do as they wish. They would be allowed to work with the war refugees, as I may not, if any of them wanted to, which they don't. What do they want? I asked. He laughed. To be priests to the king. The one thing they won't be allowed. What's that your friend, the servant girl, is always saying? I told him about Mary. Oh, you mean... Oh, you mean... Oh, you mean I mustered up my best imitation of her voice. Don't that beat all? We laughed together. At either my poor imitation of Mary's words or the perversity of Jed's brothers. I wish, I started, and immediately clamped my mouth shut. For what I had intended to say was, I wish I could laugh this way with the prince. I wish I felt as close to him as I do to you. I didn't need Madame Bassett around to tell me those were inappropriate words, indecent thoughts. But I shouldn't worry. The prince and I would feel close as soon as we could be together without a chaperone. I was just lucky that Jed, being a priest in training, didn't need to be chaperoned in my presence as well. What do you wish, my lady? Jed asked with mock formality. Because I had to say something, I blurted out. I wish I knew if you knew the truth about me. I saw a gleam of interest in his eyes, as if he'd been longing to discuss this, but I hadn't felt he could bring it up himself. In that instant, I decided to tell him everything. Well, I do know, he said. Well, I do know. He started slowly and carefully, peering straight into my eyes. That you're not a Demolian princess, as is claimed. And how do you know that? I asked. He began ticking off one of the reasons on his fingers. 1. Domilia is the farthest land we know of, and you probably could not have had the time to hear of the ball and travel here between the time it was announced and the time it was held. Maybe I have magical powers, I teased. He seemed strangely jolted by that, but went on. 2. Demilian princesses are famously ugly and wart-covered, and you, well, are not either. Are not either one ugly or wart-covered. It was the first time he had mentioned my appearance since the day we met. His glance made me uncomfortable. And? I prompted. 3. You once told me a story about your father giving away food to a hungry neighbor. Kings do not live near hungry people, and if they do, they don't feed them. They employ them or banish them. Maybe my father was an extraordinary king, I argued. Jed ignored that. And 4, you do not remember this because I was far in the background, practically out of sight, but I was there the day the prince slipped the slipper on your foot. and whisked you away to the palace. I blushed. How had I missed him? How had I missed him? Of course, that day I had eyes only for the prince. I vaguely recalled that he had a crowd of retainers with him, but they had seemed more like props than people. You were? Why? One of my royal duties, Jed said with a shrug. I was supposed to be getting experience advising the prince. Of course, my advice was disregarded. I said that I said that since your uh, I said that since your entire village knew about you, the king should announce to the world that his son was marrying a commoner. In a show of unity with his people, or some such thing. I thought it would be good for the royal image in the kingdom, but it was decided that acknowledging the truth would insult all the kings who'd hoped to marry off their daughters to Charming. As it is, I'm sure all the foreign kings have heard the rumors and are insulted, but they can't confront the Charmings without calling them liars. For just that instant, I could imagine Jed as a royal advisor. He could give well reasoned counsel, but he wouldn't care enough to be persuasive, because he'd been always thinking about the refugee camps instead. Why? I gulped, not quite sure had the nerve to voice my question. But this might be my only opportunity. Why is the prince willing to marry a mere commoner? Sorry. Okay. I wanted Jed to look at me in the eye and say, because he's fallen head over heels in love with you. Don't you know? Everybody's talking about it. Older men than my grandfather say they've never seen a prince so deeply in love. But Jed wouldn't gaze. But Jed wouldn't meet my gaze. I'd guess it's because you're not ugly and work covered like a Demolian princess. He mumbled, staring fixed, fixedly at the fire. There was a silence between us, and I felt as tongue-tied and uncomfortable as I often did with the prince. Then Jed looked up and gave me a solid grin. So, do you have magical powers, or was there a fairy godmother helping you at the ball, the way everyone claims? He asked. And that is the end of chapter 8. Chapter 8. Alright, chapter 9. Chapter 9. I think I'll read chapter 10 too. It's a pretty long one. And then maybe chapter 11 too? But we'll see, we'll see. Chapter 9 first, and then maybe probably chapter 10. I'm not sure about chapter 11, but let's just keep on going. Alright, chapter 9. That? I asked, flabbergasted. It had been one thing to hear Mary and Simpiana talk about magic and fairy godmothers, as if such things truly existed. They were uneducated, bound to be superstitious. Simpiana also couldn't count beyond 10, but Jed was learned. He was practical. He was a man. You've not heard the story going around the palace? He asked, about how you got to come to the ball when your evil stepmother had locked you in the cellar. Lucille isn't. I started to protest, in an unusual surge of loyalty. Then I remembered Jed must have seen her, in all her frilly purple dressing gown glory, the day I left. So he knew. Well, she didn't lock me in the cellar. She just told me I had to scrub it down
scrub it out by hand before she and Griselda and Coromund returned. All right, Jed said. Close enough. And you were in tears about it. But then your fairy godmother appeared. I gave him a you have got to be kidding look and let him keep talking. Your fairy godmother appeared and waved her magic wand and turned your rags into a ball gown, complete with glass slippers. Then she took a pumpkin and some mice and turned them into a carriage and horses. But she said her magic could only last until midnight. That's why you were in such a rush to leave at the stroke of 12, when you left one of your glass slippers behind, which everyone knows is how the prince found you. By the time Jed got to the one detail that was true, I was laughing so hard tears were streaming down my face. Someone actually believes that? I finally sputtered between giggles. It's more plausible than you as a Demilian princess, Jed said with a grin. What's the truth? Well, I started slowly. It wasn't quite that exciting. And yet, I felt a surge of exhilaration just thinking about that night. Not just because I'd met the prince and fallen in love and started on my course toward happiness ever after, but because I'd made something happen. I'd done something everybody had told me I couldn't. I changed my life all by myself. Having a fairy godmother would have ruined everything. Promise you won't tell anyone? I said. I mean, it probably doesn't matter to anyone, but if the king and queen and the prince still want to keep up the fiction that I'm foreign royalty, I don't want to spread my story. Jed nodded. Of course, he said. I started my tale. Once upon a time, I said mischievously, wrinkling my nose to Jed, wrinkling my nose so Jed would know I was making fun of the whole thing. I was just a poor girl in rags. But somehow, remembering everything transported me back and quickly settled into seriousness. I wasn't even pretending to be Princess Cynthiana Eleonora anymore. I was myself again. Ella Brown. Always hungry, always cold, always angry at my stepmother's and stepsister's cruelties. And that was the end of chapter 9. And yeah, chapter 9 was very short. Oh, and this is the whole story. Chapter 10 is probably the whole story. Oh no, also chapter fucking... She's spilling her gut out here. You know what? Fuck it. Because it's her story that she's telling about the whole thing and how it actually happened. I'll read it. I got an hour. Alright. Yeah, she's spilling her gut out here. The next 2 chapters are going to be the story. Alright, chapter 10. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor. Hold on. I just wanted to see where I'm at. I'm recording. Oh, okay, that's pretty good. Chapter 10. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor when the invitation arrived. Ugh. I don't know why, but when it's invitation, I always want to say invitation, which I know is not right, but like once you say it, you can't stop saying it, and it's just like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor when the invitation arrived by Royal Herald. There was a smart rap there was a smart rap at the front door, and I began debating which would make Lucille angrier. Me answering the door with a kerchief around my head and water dripping from the bottom of a skirt, or me not answering the door at all and leaving her or Cormund or Griselda to the indignity of opening it themselves. I hadn't yet I hadn't decided yet when I heard Cormund gasp. Look, Grizz! Out the window! I heard a flurry of swishing skirts and petticoats from the sitting room as they both apparently raced to the door. Thanks to a steady diet of bonbons, they each weighed twice what I did, and they rarely bestirred themselves for anything except to waddle into the dining room for their next meal. So I was sure whatever Cormund was gasping about was worth a peek. I need some water. um, so I was sure whatever Cormund was gasping about was worth a peek. Opening the kitchen door a crack, I had a direct view of a young, flaxen haired man on the doorstep. He was stunningly handsome, with a physique I'd only seen in my father's books about ancient gods and heroes. He wore tight black pants and a rich scarlet tailcoat, with a fancy design in gold on every pocket and lapel. He held a trumpet to his lips and blew two short blasts, then one long note of exquisite tone. Your your highness? Cormund was flustered, even for her. Sir? Griselda stuttered. The man gave them both looks of withering scorn. Hear ye, he boomed in a deep voice that somehow conveyed he didn't feel Cormund and Griselda were worthy of his message, but that he was not one to shirk his work, and would speak as grandly to them as he did to anyone else. The king and queen hereby invite every young maiden in the kingdom to a ball in honor of their son, Prince Charming, on Saturday night 4 weeks hence, beginning at 8 o'clock in the evening. 4 weeks hence? Would that be the 22nd? Griselda ventured timidly. No, silly, the 23rd. No, silly, the 23rd, corrected Cormund. The Saturday that would have been the 23rd, because today's the, let's see, I think it's the 4 weeks hence, the herald repeated firmly and bowed low, preparing to go. Excuse me, I said from my post in the kitchen. Did you say every young maiden? The herald looked up. By his face, he could tell he was preparing to give a disgusted retort, perhaps questioning the hearing of all women in our household. But when he saw me, his expression softened into something I didn't want to acknowledge as pity. "Aye, miss," he said in an almost gentle tone. "Every young maiden." Now, just wait a minute. Now, just wait a minute. It was Lucille, sweeping down from upstairs, where she'd been resting with a sick headache. "I would never dream of contradicting someone of your..." She looked him up and down, almost lecherously. "Your stature. But surely you don't mean that the king and queen would want their ball
cluttered with mere beggars and servants and ragamuffins. My heavens, such squalor. Surely they only surely they mean only young ladies of high social standing and good breeding, like my lovely daughters. She waved her hand gracefully toward Griselda and Cormund, who, to their credit, at least attempted to stand up straight. Cormund even stopped picking her nose momentarily. The royal herald looked at Lucille, to my stepsisters, and me. The king has invited every young maiden, he said. You wish perhaps to contradict the king? Well, no, but Lucille laughed gently, trying to make him look foolish. Perhaps you misunderstood. I did not, the herald said adamantly. Now, if you will excuse me, good day. He swept low again and departed. Cormund and Griselda fell immediately to squabbling. Now, why did you say that about the 23rd? You could have looked it up on the calendar when he was gone. Oh, but I wanted to be sure. Silence, Lucille barked. Cormund and Griselda both shut up and peered up at her, still standing imperially on the stairs. Lucille's command had surely sounded strong enough, but now she began swaying weakly. Oh, help me sit down, girls, she demanded. Her daughters sprang to her side as quickly as they could, given their bulk. Oh, there's so much to do. It's a shame. I'm so indisposed. Let me think. She held the back of her hand dramatically against her brow, and then she seemed to receive an invisible surge of strength and screeched, Ella? Ella? Oh, where is that wretched creature? Since I was by then standing at the bottom of the stairs in plain sight, her performance was hardly necessary. Yes? I said, stretching the word out to sound as insolent as possible. Say, yes, madame, when addressing your betters, she snapped. How many times do I have to tell you that? You are older than me. You have more power than me. But you are not my better, I snapped back. How many times do I have to tell you that? Ah. Also, there we go. Yeah, I made sure to, uh, yeah, it sucks. But they sound, no, I actually, what I did was there's a feature that lets me, like, in the audio mixer that I could just turn down the volume to that where it's completely mute, and that's what I did. Um, yeah. So I'm just gonna leave that in. Right? Like, I turned down, or I turned up. I think I turned down the sensitivity, and that just makes it seem like as if I've muted myself on the OBS. Which I don't know how I can mute myself on the OBS, but I think that's like the only way I can do it. Yeah, my parents were just trying to.
Yeah, and even then, it barely picks up anything if like you scroll it all the way down. Yeah, so it might be a bit of a while till you see me again, like physically. But like my parents say, we will get through this. I think you've heard too that half of the governor said, which fucking nice way to scare people, like half of California will get the virus, and I'm just like, well, that's really great. That's great. Why would you say that? I mean, cool information, please. That's scary, but also I think the virus is pretty scary. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't worried about it like a week and a half ago, but now I'm pretty worried about it. All right. No, yeah, we're gonna be safe as long as you don't head out anywhere. I'm gonna be in this house for a while. How to cope with that? More than I'm used to. Nice. Nice. Beautiful. And also sorry if you felt intimidated by my dad, like saying like unmute him, or something like that. You didn't have to, which I know you didn't probably. Cool. And that's the way it should be. Just kidding. Um. All right. So back to the story of how Cinderella got into the situation. Oh, side note, we should probably look up um that one streaming site that I think Athena wanted everyone to use when she wanted to do that one group thing. I can't remember what it's called, but it had like a bunny in it. Do you remember the streaming thing? It was like Stream Hop or something, Bunny Hop or Hopper or something. Yeah, we should ask her, or if you remember it. Yeah, we could start using that so we can still catch up on like Unisonus and stuff like that. Because I do feel like it'll be a while till I see you again. So even though it's not gonna be the same. I know, but it's the right thing to do.
Alright, anyway, because I want to be done with this by 10:30 so I can eat some chocolate. Alright, so you are older than me. You have more power than me, but you are not my better. I snapped back. How many times do I have to tell you that? She narrowed her eyes, obviously contemplating punishments. Being sent to bed without supper, her usual choice, had already been doled out for the day because I had not folded the sheets with the military precision she expected. She should have known better than to use up the biggest gun in her arsenal before 9 o'clock in the morning. No lunch for you today, she said. I did not care. Lunch was soup and bread, which I would prepare and serve. How would she know if I ate some in the kitchen? But Lucille seemed pleased with herself. Her voice softened. Be a dear and bring me a cool cloth for my forehead, she said. Then, with a sweet smile, she added, Oh, and don't even think about going to that ball. Oh, you think you can control my thoughts now, too? I retorted. Fine, think all you want, she said with a shrug, but I can assure you, you won't go. I will. Wearing what? That? She laughed, tilting her head back with such abandon. I was sure her sick headache was faked. After a long pause, proving just how slow they were on uptake, Cormont and Griselda joined in. Can you see her at the royal ball? At a royal ball? Cormont twittered. Cormont twittered. Yeah, she tweeted that out on twitter.com. I'm waiting for you. That's why I'm not reading right now. Hashtag shut the fuck up. Yeah, exactly. Alright. And those rags, uh, Griselda replied unoriginally. Oh, she replied to her tweet, to her sister's tweets. They sounded like a pair of dim-witted birds, but they had a point. I was wearing my only dress. If it had been once nice, it had once been nice back when my father was alive. But after I'd spent 2 years in it, carrying wood in, carrying ashes out, scoring pots, scrubbing floors, boiling laundry, and doing everything else that needed to be done since Lucille had dismissed all our servants as unnecessary expense, even I could no longer discern the pattern in the dress's thread and threadbare weave. They're starting a flame thread.
Sorry. Even I was at pains to see how it could possibly be mended again, just to keep me decent. I had kept silent about it, making it a battle of wills. Would Lucille buy me something before I was forced to go out about in my underclothes? Maybe the ball would force her hand. You'll buy ball gowns for Cormund and Griselda, I said. So you shall buy one for me as well. Lucille's laughter swelled again. Why, she said, so I can be held responsible for forcing a beggar upon the prince? Never. I turned on my heel, the laughter seeming to follow me down the hall. I did not get Lucille's cool cloth. I wagered I wagered her forgotten I wagered she'd forgotten it as well. But I was muttering, I will go. I'll show you. You'll see. So my plot began. In the attic, I knew my mother's wedding gown had lain untouched for years. The memories it evoked had too been painful for my father, too sacred for me. I don't think any of the Stepevils even knew it was there. Had any of them ever stepped foot in the attic, with all its dust and spiders? Late that night, after I knew they were all asleep, I crept up the stairs, pulled the gown out of the trunk, and tried it on. I had only moonlight to see, and no mirror, but I could feel the elegance of the folds of satin against my skin. I felt like a different person, not Ella Brown, former tomboy and bookworm, and current all-purpose drudge, not Cinder's Ella, or as Cormund and Griselda sometimes derisively say, called derisively called me, but as Eleonora, maybe even a Princess Eleonora. Had my mother felt this elegant had my mother felt this elegant walking down the aisle with my father? I tried to imagine it, taking halting, silent steps into the attic, but the sight of my dirty bare feet poking out from underneath the skirt ruined the effect. If I went to the ball, what would I do about shoes? I bent over the trunk to search for whatever footwear my mother had worn, and the dress slipped forward. I could feel it gaping open at the bodice. I looked down and could see clear to my thin bare thighs. Of course, the dress was much too big for me. My mother had been well nourished and healthy, and I had been living for the past 2 years on whatever food I could pilfer from the kitchen without Lucille noticing. When was the last time I hadn't been ordered to bed without supper? I had resolved then and there that the ball was just a first step. 2 years or more than enough 2 years was more than enough time to serve as a slave in my own home. I had been holding on to my father's memories in my father's house, doing the work Lucille ordered me to do with enough insolence and back talk that I was sure she'd have to break down and admit I had rights of my own. But staring down at my emaciated ribcage, I realized suddenly that Lucille was winning. No, Lucille had won. She had reduced me. Literally reduced me. Hold on.
literally reduced me to feeling that I didn't deserve food or a new ball gown, or a life. Dizzily, I sat down and reviewed my choices. I could walk away. I could hire myself out as a servant. Hold on. People are in the hallway. I don't like when, you know, people hear me read. I don't know, it's just weird. Like, I don't like it. It'll be over soon. Okay, now we begin. Sorry about that. Dizzily, I sat down and reviewed my choices. I could walk away. I could hire myself out as a maid. I certainly had enough experience, but I didn't want to spend the rest of my life hauling ashes. I could get married. The butcher's boy was a willing candidate, if not a particularly desirable one. But I'd seen enough of loveless marriage to know that that wasn't what I wanted. No, I'd wait for someone capable of making me swoon. That left only one possibility, and a slim one at that. Could I find work as a tutor of sorts for rich children? If I brushed up on my Latin and Greek, I was sure I could do quite well. I could save my money and someday come back and buy the house from Lucille. That way,
Leaving wouldn't be like giving up. The only problem was I didn't know anyone willing to pay to have their children educated. Maybe I could make someone at the ball. That decided. I felt much better and resumed digging through the trunk. And that is the end of chapter 12. And now we go to chapter 11. Chapter 11, which is the last one I'll read for today, and it's a pretty fairly long one. I'll probably read chapter 12 too because it's fairly short. And then chapter 13 is fairly long on the longer side. Hell yeah. Woo! Alright, chapter 11. Over the next 2 weeks, I plan my strategy. My tragedy. Strategy. Yeah, over the next 2 weeks, I plan my strategy with more forethought than some kings put into entire wars. I took in my mother's dress, sewing late at night by the light by a precious candle. I considered reshaping it somehow to match the current beruffled, bespangled fashions I saw in the books Griselda and Cormond had been poring over endlessly. But I had so little faith in my dressmaking skills, and fear, such great fear of ruining one of the few things I had of my mother's, that I dared not cut into the fabric at all. So I was sure my upper body would look like a stick with breasts a great tulip above the great tulip flower of the skirt. My waist had shrunk to such a degree that I could practically circle it with my own hands, but that could not be helped. I'd also found long, elegant gloves in my mother's trunk, a stroke of good fortune, since my hands were rough and chapped and cracked from the constant work. With no gloves, no one would ever know. Not that it mattered, unless I did find a potential employer at the ball. For a long time, I was stymied on the matter of shoes. I was stymied at the matter of shoes, since my mother's wedding slippers flattened my small feet like sailboats. My sole footwear was a pair of old boots of my father's, which I laced high up on my legs just to keep them on. They would hardly do. I had practiced I had practically decided to go barefoot just to keep my feet out of sight when I happened past the glassblower's shop one day one day on my way to the market. Jonas, the village glassblower, was a pompous fellow, and that day he was out in the street bragging the quality of his work. I can make anything, he boasted to his neighbor, the cartwright. Name an item, any item, and I wager I can make it. Glass slippers I can walk in without breaking, I said, slipping between them. The cartwright, Harold, looked from Jonas to me. Aye, Harold said. I'd put some money on that. Jonas looked startled, and I saw a flash of uncertainty across his face. Then the greed took over. How much? He said. Harold and Jonas began haggling. I could tell each was confident. They pushed the wager to £10. How long will it take? I asked. Lucille had been watching me more closely than ever. I think she suspected something. If I took a minute more than my allotted hour for marketing, she'd be screaming at me as soon as I walked in the door. Half an hour, Jonas said, and another 15 minutes for them to be fully cool. I'll be back then, she said, though I longed to stay and watch. Glassblowing had always fascinated me. What if Jonas needed an apprentice? All the way to the market. I toyed with the idea of asking him, but As much fun as the work might be, I didn't relish the notion of working with someone as arrogant as him, and I'd never heard of any of the craftsmen in the village apprenticing girls, just boys. No, I'd stick with the tutoring plan after the ball. I'd rush to the shop. I'd rush through the shopping, taking even less care than usual, sorting through the turnips and the rutabagas. It was spring, and fresh grains were available out in the meadows. So the shopkeepers were trying to get rid of last autumn's leftovers at practically any price. But I didn't want to think about feeding the steppe evils when there were glass slippers to be had. I stuffed vegetables into my sack without looking at them. Ah, the girl who will win me 10 pounds, Jonas proclaimed as I returned to his shop. He presented the slippers to me on a velvet pillow. They were stunning, catching the sunlight at every angle. To my untrained eyes, they looked like diamonds. Jonas leaned his head close to mine. Just don't come too just don't come too down too hard on the heels. I won't, I promised. I bit my lip and said the words I'd been rehearsing since I left the market. But if I win the money for you, I get to keep the glass slippers. Jonas squinted, sizing me up, trying to look resolute. I tried to look resolute. I must have succeeded because Jonas suddenly. I must have succeeded because slowly nodded. Aye, he said, if you win. I turned around, and it seemed that every man, woman, or child within 3 blocks was lined up outside the glassblower's doors. The glassblower's door. 6 steps, Jonas said. That's what Harold and me agreed on. I took a deep breath and slipped the shoes on. They were not uncomfortable, but they held together. They were not comfortable, but they held together as I stepped out the door. 1, the crowd shouted. 2, I kept my eyes on my feet, trying to avoid getting the heels caught between cobblestones. 3, 4. For the first time, I considered what would happen if the shoes broke. Would I be digging shards of glass out of my feet for the rest of my life? 5. I stepped gingerly. My ankles wobbled. 6. The crowd burst into cheers, and Jonas let out a triumphant whoop. Whoop. For the first time, I looked up. Those who weren't cheering were giving me strange looks, and I realized what a sight I must be, in rags and glass slippers. I stepped out of the shoes and went to find Jonas. He was collecting the money, not just from Harold, but from a whole lineup of men. Thank you, I said. I'll take these now. I'll take those now, he said, reaching for the shoes. But you said, I protested. A misunderstanding, he said, his grip tightening on the shoes. What's a beggar like you need glass slippers for? I can sell these for good money. I drew myself to my full weight and glared. I think I misunderstood my deal with you, I asked. Perhaps all these people did too, then. You said I could keep the shoes if I won the bet for you. If I don't keep the shoes, you must have not won the bet. I could remember my father attempting to teach me logic years ago, and I didn't think my argument would hold up as a formal proof. But it worked against Jonas, because the crowd around him began to grumble. What? We don't have to pay? You trying to cheat the girl, Jonas? You cheating us? Jonas let go of the shoes. Very well, he said tightly. I turned and ran before he changed his mind. It wasn't very dignified, but I had my shoes now. The day the ball came, Griselda and Cormond spent the entire day preparing, or rather, demanding that I prepare them. I curled their limpy, mousy locks at least 6 times apiece, trying to get the curls to hold. At 6 o'clock, I helped them into their dresses, which were so covered with ruffles and ribbons that they both looked like giant wedding cakes with heads on top. I stitched up the back of Cormond's dress, where she'd ripped out a seam getting into it. I fastened and then unfastened and then refastened the hook to get at the back of Griselda's neck when she complained, "It's too tight! It's too loose! It's too tight!" I personally placed forkfuls of food in their mouths when they got hungry, and Lucille admonished them not to eat in fear of messing their dresses. If I hadn't hated them before, I'd surely despise them now. I thought I could never be happier than I was at 7:30 when their hired carriage drove up and Lucille crowed, "Girls, time to see and be seen," and they were off. Lucille leaned her head back in the door and bellowed, "Remember, scrub the entire cello before we're back." I made a face she couldn't see, and as soon as she let the door close. I scurried upstairs, scrubbed my face and hands and feet, and pulled my mother's dress over my head. I piled my hair atop my head and tied it with a thin blue ribbon. A thin blue ribbon Griselda would neither recognize nor miss. I laced my father's boots onto my feet, for it was good a good half-hour walk to the castle, and I hardly planned to do that. In glass slippers. I tucked the slippers under my arm and took off. It was a pleasant evening, unseasonably warm. Birds were singing in the trees, and I remember feeling incredibly free. When was the last time I'd spent a half hour outdoors, all by myself, with no errands to run for Lucille? I thought of the cello waiting to be scrubbed, and I grimaced. It was a long, dirty job. But surely if I left the ball by midnight, I could have it done before morning, if I was lucky. Lucille wouldn't check before then. And if I wasn't lucky, what if Lucille or Cormund or Griselda saw me at the ball? I tossed my head and decided I didn't care. I was leaving anyway, somehow. This night would mark my declaration of independence from Lucille. One way or another, I would not go back to being her slave. When I was inside of the castle, I took my father's boots off my now blistered feet and pulled on the glass slippers. They were still anything but cozy. Yeah, they were still anything but cozy. I reconsidered the barefoot notion until I looked down and saw how lovely the slippers were, sparkling in the last gleams of twilight. At least they didn't rub the same places the boots had. I hid the boots behind a tree and stood there for a moment, watching luxurious carriages pull up to the castle gates and discharge girls like me, most of them obviously unaccustomed to finery. They were all in giggly bunches. "Coo! Get a load of me in a ball gown. Hey, Jane, you're a fine sight. You gonna think you're too good to slop the hogs now?" Some of them did, indeed, look ridiculous and out of place, but all of them at least had carriages. No one arrived on foot. I watched the carriages circle around the curved driveway and park, evidently planning to wait there until the ball ended and it was time to take all their passengers back home to their lives as servant girls and counter girls and scullery maids. Once they tied their horses up, the drivers began milling about alongside the driveway, talking and laughing at the spectacle of dozens of girls dressed to kill. I slipped over to the nearest driver, who'd been bent on one of his horse's shoe. Sir, I cleared my throat. Sir, for a farthing, could would you take me to the castle gate in your carriage? He looked up, bug-eyed. Why, miss, I'd be honored to. He helped me up into the carriage and snapped the reins smartly against his horse's backs. They jerked as if surprised to be working again so soon, but they perked up and pranced over to the gate. The driver helped me out. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I can't afford any more. He waved away my apologies. No matter. If you're out by midnight, I could drive you back a ways too. Someone like you needs to leave in elegance. But I don't have any more money. No matter, he said again. My privilege. I began climbing the castle stairs behind a gaggle of ruffly skirts. The doorman directed the girls in front of me to the left. He sent me to the right, and I wondered if that was a sign I wasn't dressed well enough. Um, and I wondered if that was a sign I wasn't dressed well enough. Then I caught a sight of a vast wall of mirror in front of me. It reflected back a radiant, statuesque woman in an ivory dress, much like mine. I honestly began looking around for the woman to ask if she was wearing her mother's wedding dress too. It took me a full minute to realize that woman was me. I hadn't looked in the mirror in a long time, and I had, well, grown. My cheeks were flushed from the walk, and the excitement, and my hair, though slightly mussed, was still sleek and silken. The curls that had escaped my ribbon looked as though they were supposed to be that way. The dress clung in all the right places, and as slender as I'd become, I was still plenty large where I needed to be. I was beautiful, truly beautiful. I was still reeling from the shock of that notion when a fussy little man in a velvet waistcoat approached me. And how shall we announce you? He asked. Announced? I stammered, as stupidly as Griselda or Cormund. Your name, he said, as though he expected women to be stupid. Yeah, feel yourself. Get in your feels, girl. I watched an exquisitely dressed woman in front of me stand in an entryway while a deep voice called out, Esmeralda Maria von Dapria. She curtsied, and it sounded as though the entire village was applauding her, and then she glided into the ballroom. So I was to be announced, too. The Steppe Evils would know I was here. Well, so be it. My chin shot defiantly into the air. Just say, Cinder's Ella is here, I said. The man raised one eyebrow but nodded. He gave me a little push, and then I was standing in the entrance, blinded by the spotlights. Cinderella, the voice called out. Numbly, I moved forward, trying to get into the shadows so I could see. But almost instantly, a man took my hand. May I have this dance? I nodded, too stunned to speak. Evidently, no words were needed. The man who took my other hand and whirled me along with the music. I have not danced much, so at first it took all my concentration to follow his lead. But he had all the skill I lacked. Soon I could think and dance both, just by letting him take control. I examined my partner. He had a wide chest, a cleft chin, a strong jaw, brilliant blue eyes, golden hair, and a gleaming crown. I gasped. "You're the prince," I said. "Yes," he said, and I liked the way he said it. Very simply. He didn't boast. He didn't apologize the way I thought I would have if I'd been royalty. "Yes, but please don't let it make you think any differently of me." My heart beat fast. I hoped Lucille saw me dancing with the prince, but when I tried to look around to see if any of the step pupils were watching, I began to lose the time of the waltz and nearly stumbled. I focused on the prince again. Because of my fragile glass slippers, I had to lean into him. I hoped he didn't think me forward. The song ended with a whisper of violins, and I expected the prince to move on to another girl, but he peered deep into my eyes and murmured, "Again?" I felt a thrill and murmured back, "Yes. Surely Lucille would see me now." Somehow, we ended up dancing every dance together. My feet were practically bloodied with the rubbing of the slippers, and I asked to sit down. The prince led me out onto a terrace, just me and him. Just him and me. From there, I could see the moonlight and starshine and fields of roses. I looked back toward the castle and saw suddenly that there were two ballrooms facing the terrace. The first, where I'd been, was small and intimate. The other was large and packed. I caught sight of Fuchsia Rifle. Yes, Griselda and Cormond were in the ballroom, so they hadn't seen me. The prince began gently tracing the outline of my face with his finger, turning my face toward him. "You're very beautiful," he whispered in a reverent tone. I wanted to say, "You are too," but I knew that was wrong, because he was handsome, not beautiful. And then I couldn't say anything else because his hands moved to the back of my head and were pulling me closer. And suddenly he was kissing me, and I didn't think of any words, only him. Somehow he lifted me up, and we were dancing again, out on the terrace, under the stars. I could hear the music from the ballroom, light and beautiful. And then I heard something else. A rumbling dong, dong, dong. I pulled back and stared up at the palace clock. "Oh no, is it midnight?" I asked. The prince looked at me in a puzzled way. "It is," I said. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I have to leave. I have to leave by midnight. It's a silly thing, but still, had I've had such fun with you. It's just well, you probably need to dance with all the others. Goodbye. Thank you." "You cannot leave," the prince said, attempting to pull me close again. I jerked away. "Yes, I must. I'm sorry. So sorry." I flew through the door, back through the ballroom, and out the front door. I raced down the steps, forgetting to come down easy on the glass heels. I felt one shoe give ever so slightly, and I took it off so it wouldn't break. I didn't have time to pick it up, so I just left it there on the castle steps. I saw the kind driver who'd helped me before, waiting at the gate. Do you have time?" I asked him, "before your real customers come?" He nodded and helped me in, and his horse practically galloped away. He dropped me off at the tree where I'd left my boots, and I walked home and scrubbed the cellar as fast as I could. I heard the Seppules arrive home at 3, grumbling that they barely even seen that they'd barely seen the prince, and wasn't the food perfectly awful. And that is the end of chapter 11. Fucking exciting, right? Alright. This one I can do pretty quick. Yes. Okay, I'll do chapter 12 too because it's the chapter of Jed's reaction basically to the story. Oh fuck. I'm like, oh, it's hot. Okay, chapter 12. When I finished my story, I was surprised to look up and see Jed instead of the dark, dirty walls of the cellar back home. I'd gotten so involved in the telling, I'd practically forgotten my story was all over. It it had it had ended happily. I was in the castle for good now. I blinked several times, as blinded as someone walking into a dim hovel from bright sunshine. That's probably why I couldn't read the strange expression on Jed's face, or maybe I was just confused. When I finally stopped blinking, he looked the same as ever, thoughtful and curious and kind. And then? He asked. You know the rest, I said. You know the rest, I said. You were there, I guess. The next afternoon, the prince came with my shoe and carried me off. Jed leaned forward intently. But before that, did you tell Lucille you were leaving? Did you find someplace else to go? I barely had a day, I said. Not even that, because Lucille and the girl slept in far past noon, and it was barely mid-afternoon when the prince showed up. But his question made me defensive. I didn't want to admit to Jed that I'd spent that morning mooning over the prince, reliving every dance to every glance. I'd carried the wood, dreaming of the kiss on the terrace. I'd carried out ashes, remembering the feeling of his hand on my back, guiding me across the dance floor. There was, there was a, there was a part of me that held back, pragmatically chiding myself. What do you think you're doing? You'll never see the prince again unless it's from a distance, when he's up on the castle balcony making a royal proclamation, and you're down in the crowd with all the other commoners. Someday you can tell your grandchildren about dancing with the prince, but for now, you've got other things to think about. And then I'd scraped my knuckles on the washboard, because I was distracted, remembering the timbre of the prince's voice when he said, "May I have this dance?" Jed cleared his throat, but his voice still came out half cracked, half racked, half cracked. So that's how you got here, he said. He grinned, a gleam of mischief returning to his eye. I can't say your story's that much less incredible than the ones about fairy godmothers and magic pumpkins. But it's the truth, I said. Impulsively, I reached for Jed's hand and squeezed it. Don't you believe me? I know the truth has to be secret, but can't you get someone to stop all those rumors? Jed jerked back his hand, and I instantly felt ashamed, as though I had done something improper. Princess, he said, with unusual emphasis. He never called me princess. Nobody can stop those rumors. People would rather believe in fairy godmothers and well, divine intervention, if you will, than to think that you took charge of your own destiny. Later, after Jed left, I lay down on my bed, stared up at the arc of canopy over my head, and thought about what he'd said. Had I taken charge of my own destiny? Sure, I'd found a way to go to the ball against Lucille's wishes, but the rest, the prince dancing with me, the prince bringing me my shoe and seeking my hand in marriage, that had been far beyond my control. I had no thought of trying to get him to marry me. I picked up my comforter. I picked up my comforter, though, of course, being a royal thing, it had no loose threads or raveled weave to pick at. Why, I wondered, had telling Jed my story left me feeling so let down? Shouldn't I still feel triumphant? victorious? Hadn't I gotten what I wanted? And that is the end of chapter 12. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.